Chapter 2 of The Voice of the Lion Was Heard in the Land, a Good Omens fanfiction, written by A.N.D., read aloud by SkyAsimaru. If you enjoy this podfic, you can check out the original story on Archive of Our Own. If you would like to hear more of my recordings or see some of my own work, you can find me through the pen and screen name of SkyAsimaru. The Voice of the Lion Was Heard in the Land, Chapter 2, Working Relationships and Working Relationships. Summary. At every recording of this on and off job, Az remained flustered by his gorgeous, unattainable co-star. Tony had forgotten how adorable Az was. The more so because this time neither one of them was worrying about not being hired. Apparently, the boy whiz handling the cartoon's marketing had run a Kickstarter for Adam's Animals to build their own little in-house recording studio, as well as raise the acting pay a fractional amount. Supporters were to get a DVD of the first 6 episodes, and, if they'd paid enough, their names in the credits. Nevertheless, there was no reason for Tony to believe that Az, adorable or not, wasn't straight. Until the time Tony overheard that fateful conversation. Tony was innocently strolling down to the lavatory when he heard Az's voice saying gently, "There's nothing wrong with being attracted to both men and women. But church," it sounded like Brian. "Find a new church." This was firm. Male and female he created them. That's right at the beginning of the Bible. We are all created in God's image, and God said that we are to love one another. That's easy for you to say. Is it? I have felt the way you do from before it was safe for me to say so, before it was legal for me to say so. There are still people who would tell us that bisexuals don't belong in a pride parade. But we're here, son. We've always been here, and I'll always be willing to help you navigate this. They moved off, but Tony was frozen. At least until his bladder pointed out that he had business to attend to. He's bi. He's beautiful and he's bi. I have a chance. From that moment forward, through the episodes, and the next 2, and the 2 after that, Tony put himself on display. He had no idea when the Kickstarter money or Arthur Young's patience would run out, so he threw himself into a frantic, silent seduction at every opportunity. He accidentally, on purpose, dropped green carnation merch everywhere, casually mentioned that it was London's biggest gay nightclub, until Pepper rolled her eyes every time he opened his mouth, leaned in close while they ran through scripts, drank his coffee in a ridiculous manner to show off his biteable neck, and generally lounged in every position he could manage. Look at me! I am very fit, very flexible, and very, very gay. Az remained very, very, very oblivious. Eventually, Tony got more personal to try to draw him out. So, what's Az short for anyway? Azira. Really? Like someone misspelled Ezra? Like Oprah or something? Azira blushed, something he was doing more and more around Tony, becoming more and more adorable every time. "Oh, it's one of those made-up names. My grandparents apparently fought over who I should be named after, so my mother mashed up syllables from everyone." "Ouch." "Oh, it's not too bad once you get used to it. At least I knew I'd never have to change my name to be listed with the guild." Az's smile was real, warm, and amused. At the sight, Tony tumbled out of lust and fell irretrievably into love. At every recording of this on and off job, Az remained flustered by his gorgeous, unattainable co-star. He resigned himself to table readings full of longing glances and furtive touches, leaning into one another to point out a word read wrong in the script, fingers lingering when handing over cups of tea. Az had never been that fond of rehearsals before, but now he eagerly seized the chance to be close to the maddening, tempting Tony. If he didn't know better, he'd swear that Tony was flirting with him, as if an edgy, effortlessly cool twink would seriously deign to be interested in a fat, frumpy duffer like him. "He spends every night in that club surrounded by hot, fun, well-off men on the pool. And you, my dear, are too portly to be hot, too fussy to be fun, and too poor to be a sugar daddy. He's like this to you because he's like this to everyone," Az sternly reminded himself every hour on the hour. Twice whenever Tony touched him. Or at least he was probably like that to every actor. Tony hadn't tried one on any of the other staff of Adam's animals. Quite right, too. Most of them were young enough to be his children. And Mr. Young was practically a caricature of the straight British family man. But with no other colleagues around, it was Az that Tony kept leaning against, tried to play footsie with underneath the rehearsal table, blowing in his ear whenever Az was doing a monologue. But it obviously wasn't flirting. Nobody male, flirted with the tea guy. And his previous pool of ladies of a certain age had stopped doing it when the royalties ran out and his clothes got shabby. No, with Tony it was just a laugh, just a prank, like the time Tony swapped things around on the tea tray and got Arthur to salt his tea, or when he snuck off to the lavatory to inhale a helium balloon right before a table read. Tony was full of pranks and tricks, and what he did with character voices was just amazing. Az wanted to get him laid out on a bed sometime and play him like an instrument to see just how many different noises he could make. The toe of a snakeskin boot bumped against his ankle, oh so gently, trying to hook under his trouser leg, jarring Az back to the reality of today's table reading and the colorful script in front of him. Tony just scribbled notes in the margins of his script with whatever bureau he picked up. Az found it easier to keep his many characters straight with color coding and meticulous reminders. Nobody actually said anything when he started out rehearsals by laying out all his highlighters and colored pencils. And Tony had been magnificent about swapping script pages before Az even started fussing if he accidentally used the wrong color. But it It was the kind of caution that irritated quick-minded, casual, clever people. People like Tony. Az knew he was foolish and prim and meticulous and introverted, and hopelessly in lust with Tony, who could not possibly be serious about all this flirtation. Despite the feel of snakeskin brushing softly up his calf, Az's next line came out in a squeak. He cleared his throat and tried again as Tony silently laughed into his script. As if a script meant much in his hands. Tony was an inveterate ad-libber. What he said only vaguely corresponded to the words Az was reading along with, but Adam Young didn't seem to mind. Az settled his shoulders. "It's just a prank! It's just a prank!" He prided himself on never breaking character and never going off script. The maddening Tony got him to do the former all too often, making Az all the more determined to never do the latter. They had returned to a storyline that they had done a couple of times before. Simon the Snake had a perfect plan that wasn't, leaving Leo to rally the rest of the animal friends to clean up the mess. Az was watching Tony closely in the hopes of having the faintest clue when it was going to be his turn to speak, without stepping on whatever lines he was improvising. The script said, "So, then we'll get all the juicy apples out of Mr. Collins's trees." Tony said, "So, then we'll all get hookers and blow," and grinned impishly at him. Az couldn't help it. He burst into warm laughter. "Don't be foolish, dear boy," he chided gently, ad-libbing for the first time in his cautious, proper life. Both actors were startled to hear cheers and applause. Adam, who attended every reading, sat back with a smile. "That was perfect!" "Really?" Tony said, surprised. "I don't think the kiddies—" "No, not you. Him! I loved that. It was perfect. That was Leo. I'm going to write that line into this one, and I want you to record it a few times before you leave tonight, as we may backfill some of the other episodes before they go out." "Well, that's not what I planned," Tony said bemusedly, and jumped when there was another round of applause. Everyone who has written a story knows how the pacing goes. The tension builds and builds and builds until it is finally relieved in a big cathartic explosion. The person in peril is saved. The hero and villain have a huge fight. The unspoken attraction is finally expressed. Sounds were Brian's job. He mixed what he could out of free online sound libraries, or bought whatever he could get past Wensleydale's parsimonious approval. Anything else was created in-house by Az and Tony, who gamely roared, hissed, barked, growled, hooted, snarled, grunted, whistled, clinked cutlery, noisily drank, loudly chewed, and anything else necessary. These measures worked right up until the need for impact sound of a surprised snake falling out of a tree, but not getting too hurt because this is a children's show. Tony was trying his best. He made all the different oof and whoops and ow noises he could wring out of his throat, while Brian threw a weight against pillows, but none of it was working. Oh, it needs something, and I don't know what. What does it need? Adam asked the universe, as frustrated as the rest of them. I think I know. Az had been quiet up until now, and Tony gave him a sideways glance of suspicion. Az didn't often offer advice, preferring to passively, if meticulously, carry out any orders he was given. This was not a problem that could be fixed by pretending he was a pineapple, or highlighting his lines in blue, or whatever basic acting school advice Tony was sure was going to come. Az stood up. May I get a little physical with you, dear boy? Whatever, Tony muttered, internally cursing the luck of finally getting his fondest fantasy on a day he was too tired and limp to enjoy anything. Az rolled up his sleeves. It's not working because there's no sense of actual impact. Az turned back to Tony. May I demonstrate? I'll try not to hurt you. Tony, staring in hopeless, exhausted lust at the rare sight of a bare forearm, nodded. Az balled his fists into Tony's jacket, yanking him up on his toes. And suddenly, one specific part of Tony was not feeling limp at all. Roll tape! Tony was being pushed hard backwards. Wait, what was behind him? Oh, yes, the wall. Are you okay? I didn't hurt you, Az whispered, still holding up the winded Tony, who could only stare at him through wide, dilated eyes, before belatedly remembering how to move his head up and down in a nod. Perfect! One more take! Brian ordered. Up to it, dear boy. Tony.x had crashed. It was his fantasies, not his higher faculties, that said, Yeah, sure, whatever you want. Az hauled him off the wall effortlessly. Tony watched in fascination as unexpected muscles bunched under Az's comfortably padded form. Suddenly he was hiked even higher, completely off his feet. Tony just had time to think. Oh, hello, new kink I didn't know I had. Again? Yeah. Tony was aching by the third time he was hauled off the wall. His ribs dimly, his dick mainly. Somewhere he heard Brian asking for one more take, and all Tony could do as he involuntarily nodded and felt his feet leave the floor again was pray that he wouldn't come in his pants. Az really put his back into it this time, following so close that their noses bounced off each other as Tony was abruptly stopped by the architecture. Az was still close, leaning into him, asking if he was okay, and... Oh. Punters had ground on Tony often enough at the club for him to recognize that Az, or at least a vital part of him, was enjoying this very much indeed. And if he could feel Az, then Az could feel... Az's pupils blew wide. They stared at each other, frozen in shock and recognition. Then, just as Tony was wondering if he dared start grinding his co-star in front of the bosses, Pepper's sarcastic voice broke through.
Just kiss already and get it over with!
Oh! Az dropped Tony, whose knees weren't working properly. I'm being so unprofessional. I'm so sorry, he burbled as he backed away. Tony reached out, not caring who saw this. he got his own double fistful of Az's shirt, and just as Az was about to start fretting, Tony stopped his mouth with Tony's mouth. After a frozen moment, the kiss was everything Tony had fantasized about, and more. Eventually they came up for air, panting frantically, Tony's hands still bunched in an uncomplaining Az's shirt. Pepper snorted and rolled her eyes. Adam smiled. Brian gave them a thumbs up.
She's right. We're stupid idiots,
Tony gasped between breaths, ignoring Pepper's snort.
We're utter morons who have taken too long to ask the really important question.
What? Are you gay? Or do you mean, do you fancy me?
Your place or mine?
A few weeks later, it was an irrelevant question, because they'd moved in together. To be continued in Chapter 3.
Thank you for reading. Please drop by the archive and let the author know what you thought of their work.